I could have died 100 bloody ways.
You could float a whaling ship, and the high-born blood I've spilled. None like the last. None like her. I'd give back all the coin if I could. But what have I accomplished? I've had enough killing.
I've learned that our choices always matter. To someone. Somewhere. I murdered an empress, but saved her daughter. That's not so bad.
Where is my mother? All that's left are these wounds. Farewell, Billie. For the last time.
Daud began as a nameless assassin in the opening scene of Dishonored, a red-clad killer who wordlessly drove a blade into the kind-hearted Empress Jessamine and dragged little Princess Emily away to some unknown fate. There was no indication and no reason to think he was anything other than a stock antagonist we as the player character would hunt down and execute. No one would have blamed Arkane for going that route, as so many game developers have done before and since. Oh, how little we suspected. Over the course of multiple games and DLCs, Daud developed into one of the most interesting and tragic figures of the immersive sim genre, or even of all game history by some opinions. This video will examine many of the events of his life, try to understand something of his character and, most importantly, the choices he made and their consequences. Daud was voiced by the incomparable Michael Madsen, who sadly passed into the void in July of 2025. His intense, gravelly voice and his history of portraying tortured characters trapped in lives of violence and regret made him the only possible choice to bring the Knife of Dunwall to life. He will be sorely missed. Daud was born in Serkonos on the 13th of Ice in 1795. Making him 42 in the events of Dishonored 1 and 57 in Death of the Outsider, 3 years older than Corvo Atano. Little is known of his parents. His mother was from one of the islands off the coast of Pandysia, and was a prisoner aboard a pirate ship when Daud was conceived. We know that the Pendletons used slaves captured from this area in their mines, so it's likely she was taken from her home for this purpose. The ship was bound for Serkonos, probably to the eastern archipelago that's home to many pirates, but by the time it arrived, the captain was dead, and she had taken control of the crew. These circumstances make it not unlikely that Daud was the product of rape, which was quickly avenged, but this is not certain. Rumors call Daud's mother a witch, but he claims she was simply proficient in the use of poisons and hallucinogens, crafty and deadly to any who crossed her, after being pushed to the absolute edge of sanity and survival. Daud's childhood in Serkonos seems to have been relatively normal at first. The heart tells of his abilities, probably referring to stealth and possibly fighting, impressing other children in the schoolyard. When we encounter Daud in the Void, he speaks extensively of his mother, remembering how she used to sing to him, the songs she'd learned from her mother, of her hair like dark smoke, warm voice, and smell like night-blooming flowers, and of how she went by many different names, so he never knew which one to use. He also says he can't remember her face or voice, and that she died the day he went away. The heart says one day a man came and took him away from school, and he never saw his mother again. Nothing more is known of this intriguing event. The implication is that his mother was killed and Daud was kidnapped, but we can't know anything more for sure. When he was 16, he went to Dunwall and made a name for himself as a gang killer, moving through the shopkeepers and watch officers like a reaper through wheat. He traveled the Isles learning human anatomy.
Makes you a more efficient killer, right?
Correct.
As well as occult knowledge, including seeking out outsider shrines. Seemingly any skill he could use to ply his deadly trade. This might be when he first drew the outsiders' attention. He spent a winter studying at the Academy of Natural Philosophy, though we can be fairly certain he never intended to earn a degree. We know how difficult it is even to be allowed to pass through the doors of the academy, so we can assume he was quite educated by this time. He was marked by the outsider in 1820. He used his powers to become famous as an assassin for hire. His powers include Blink, though unlike Corvo's initial version of the ability, his freezes time while aiming. He also uses Bend Time, Summon Assassin, Void Gaze, Pull, and has general resistance to poisons. Through the power of Arcane Bond, he can grant a measure of his powers to his followers, an ability he shares with Granny Rags and Delilah. Using this, he assembled a gang of ex-mercenaries, criminals, and street kids into the Whalers, so called for the masks they wear, which are also used to protect whale butchers from noxious gases. Not all of his minions exhibit powers. Interestingly, during the assassination of Jessamine Caldwin, one Whaler seems to use an inverted version of Pull, pushing Corvo up against a pillar to immobilize him. Those who cannot share in his powers, Daud uses in other ways. He makes use of bone charms, but is selective about which. A corrupted charm he once bought protected him against weapons, but robbed him of several teeth. This he gave to a minion. Daud is indiscriminate in his targets. He'll take coin to kill one noble, then take more coin to kill the one who hired him. They're mostly corrupt aristocrats, but occasionally he's hired to kill someone who was just too honest for their own good. Sometimes the Whalers are hired to kidnap someone for bounty or ransom or for other reasons. Many lower priority targets are delegated to Whalers without Daud's personal supervision, while he focuses on higher profile marks. Daud has no concern for collateral deaths, sternly telling his followers not to waste sleep darts trying to avoid bystanders. It's interesting to note that his wanted posters in Dishonored 1 show only a generic masked Whaler, but regular civilians recognize his face immediately, and at some point he stood still long enough for Sokolov to paint his portrait. In 1829, Daud took on Billie Lurk after she followed him to his hideout. Impressed at her ability and lack of fear, he taught her his skills and shared his abilities. She'd been living as a fugitive for a year after killing Rodanus Abel, and she quickly rose to become his second-in-command by 1837. The Whalers seem not to have had a specific base at this time, only wrecked and ruined parts of the city. In 1835, Daud briefly crossed paths with the Brigmore Witches and even counted them as allies. But since he didn't even know Delilah's name until later, it can't have been a very close association. During the plague, the Whalers moved into the flooded district, into the Rudshore Chamber of Commerce building, and it may be the witches moved out of this area to avoid coming into conflict. At some point, the outsider lost interest in Daud and did not speak to him. It may be that using his mark for simple assassination was a boring disappointment. By 1837, Hiram Burroughs had made use of Daud's services several times in his role as spymaster, and thus hired him to kill Jessamine and abduct Emily at the beginning of Dishonored 1. Not counting on Corvo's presence, Daud intervened himself rather than observe from a distance, and thus upped the price. But seeing the complete ruin of the city and empire brought by this killing, Daud became racked with guilt and regret, and something broke inside him. All those bloody years hit him at once, and this was taken for weakness by Billie, who conspired with Delilah to replace him as leader of the Whalers. While the outsider, interested in him once again as his story was nearing an end, set him on a path to collide with Delilah, Corvo was making his way to a final confrontation of his own. Daud tracks down the truth about the witches in the Knife of Dunwall and Brigmore Witches DLCs, dealing with Bundry Rothwild and Arnold Timpsch, invading overseers, Billie's betrayal, the Hatter and Dead Eels gangs, and finally Delilah herself. In low chaos, Billie cannot go through with her betrayal, throwing herself on Daud's mercy, and in high chaos it's a duel to the death. The canon outcome is Billie's banishment from Dunwall. The day Daud recovers the engine coil for Lizzie Stride's boat is the same day as the Boyle Masquerade Ball, which Corvo infiltrates. As in the case of Corvo, Zombie Clone has a great video covering these game events, so this video won't spend much time on them. Billie's betrayal greatly affects Daud and probably contributes to his decision to abandon the assassin's life, one way or another. Daud finally discovers that Delilah intends to use a magic painting and ritual to possess Emily Kaldwin and rule in her body, and after pursuing her to the void, deals with her in one of several ways. But he has no illusions that saving Emily washes away his murder of her mother. It's after this that Daud captures Corvo, poisoned and drifting through the flooded district. He could easily have killed Corvo at this point, but instead he strips Corvo's gear away and dumps him in a pit to await delivery to Havelock for the bounty put on him. Now, Daud knows very well that Corvo's powers would let him easily escape. Possession, blink, or even just the agility enhancement are enough. Why would Daud do this? Daud wants a reckoning. He knows the world doesn't punish bad people, so he invites his own comeuppance. He doesn't make it too easy, telling his followers to kill Corvo if they can, but knowing he's coming for him. When Corvo confronts Daud, in low chaos Daud even dismisses his whalers for a one-on-one fight. This is a man who spent decades inflicting his decisions on the world, and now yearns for judgment by someone else, to take the burden off his hands just for once. When Corvo defeats Daud, he asks for his life, but accepts whatever choice Corvo makes. In Dishonored 1, the player makes this choice, but in the Brigmore Witches, the Chaos level decides whether Daud lives or dies. For obvious reasons, the canon choice is that he lives, as Corvo decides that living out his days in fear is the more appropriate fate. Daud flees the city and disappears, perhaps taking the book describing the Empire's ports of call that Billie sent him as a guide. Third-in-command Thomas attempts to hold the whalers together for a time, but as their powers fade, so does the gang, and the remnants are forced to take what jobs they can get, such as being bouncers at the Golden Cat. In the Brigmore Witches DLC, there's an achievement called Enough Coin to Disappear, which can be earned by completing the game with at least 10,000 coin. In the Low Chaos epilogue, Daud places his sword at the grave of Jessamine before leaving Dunwall. For the next 15 years, nothing is known about him. He goes to Tivia, living in Wagon, the furthest settlement in the Empire. Presumably, he lives quietly off the coin he's accumulated over the years. In the novel The Return of Daud, this retirement is interrupted by nightmares involving the outsider. These must have been very troubling, since they shift his attitude from accepting the consequences of his choices to blaming the outsider for his violent life, enough to want to kill him. These dreams, as well as rumors, reveal the existence of the twin-bladed knife, which created the outsider 4,000 years ago. The knife was found by the Tivian political prisoner Zukov in the novel The Corroded Man, and he used it to attempt to change history so that he ruled Tivia. These plans were thwarted by Corvo and Emily, and after Zukov is killed, the knife disappears. Hearing of these events, Daud returns to Dunwall just in time to witness Delilah's reappearance and coup against Emily. He watches Emily flee Dunwall Tower from a distance, but decides not to get involved. He goes to inquire the Six Ways gang about the knife, as they dealt in such objects. After surviving an attack by Clockwork soldiers, he goes to the town Porterfell to speak with Maximilian Norcross, current owner of the knife. He's also secretly watched by Miles and Margot Devlin, agents of the League of Protectors who are sworn to guard the Empress's life, acting from the shadows. After a failed attempt to assassinate Daud, he's taken prisoner by Norcross, whose estate is in fact Morgengard Castle, once home to the Kings of Bristol before the War of Four Crowns created the Empire. Norcross is an eccentric with a taste for rare occult artifacts as well as human taxidermy. One wonders if he ever did business with Brozenar. Before Norcross can interrogate Daud, the estate is attacked by members of the Eyeless gang, who kill Norcross and steal the knife. After making his own escape from the burning estate, Daud pursues the knife to Serkonos. This takes place during the events of Dishonored 2. En route, he pays for a ship passage by working as part of the crew, and, annoyed at having been taken prisoner so easily, trains himself back to his old strength, though the years have taken a toll. Arriving in Karnaca soon after Brianna Ashworth has been dealt with, he meets with the daughter of one of his old lieutenants to gain information, but is spied on by two of Ashworth's former witches who attack him. After surviving this, the Devlins convince Daud that they can get him the knife and lure him to a safe house where they plan to ambush him. At this house, Daud is shocked to encounter Billie Lurk, who has traveled there from the near future to change history. We will learn later in the novel The Veiled Terror that she's in the process of trying to undo the damage done by the void creature she confronted. The Devlins flee, but during the ambush, Daud gets hold of the knife to fight off hired thugs. Holding the knife causes Daud to lose consciousness. When he awakes, Billie tells him she can't manage to change history, and the moment he took the knife has become fixed. The event has left him with an illness that will kill him eventually. Billie leaves to continue fighting the void creature across time, but tells Daud he will meet present-day Billie soon, and that he must not tell her any of this for fear of disrupting the timeline. Meanwhile, the remaining witches use the corrupted oraculum to trap Daud within his own mind and turn him over to the eyeless. This is how he ends up forced to fight at the Albarca Baths. On the 18th of Nets in 1852, he wakes up, still determined to kill the outsider, and it's soon after that Billie rescues him, beginning the events of Death of the Outsider. In Death of the Outsider, Daud is weak, almost to the point of death. He's not that old, but he behaves like a very elderly man. The sickness of the knife and the months of forced fighting have ruined him, and he can feel the void dragging him away, bit by bit. Billie, having shed the name Megan Foster, has spent months tracking him down, getting a tip from Thomas, who tells her he never really stopped killing, and he's got the same old grudges. When Billie finds him at the Albarca, she shuts off the suppression field preventing him from using his powers, and he uses blink and bend time to instantly eliminate the eyeless holding him. But for the rest of the game, he's almost an invalid. He remains on the dreadful whale, relaying information while Billie gathers clues on the knife's location, and then the knife itself. During the mission to get the knife from Dolores Michaels' bank, the outsider callously tells Billie that Daud is dead. But we haven't seen the last of him yet. Returning to the whale, Billie sees that it's true. She burns the disabled ship, and Daud along with it, as fitting a funeral pyre as she could make, using the ship named with an anagram for Farewell Daud. Among the few things she retrieves from the ship is an audiograph, Daud's last goodbye made just before his death. In it, Daud urges her to continue the mission to kill the outsider. He thanks Billie for her loyalty and forgives her betrayal so long ago, knowing she'd had no choice given the life they led then. The fact that he could have died 100 bloody ways but ends up going out in relative peace on her ship, sipping her last good whiskey, gives us what could be the one and only time Daud has ever left. It's as much of a win as he could ever have imagined. Determined to finish the job, Billie tracks the cult of the outsider to their base at Shinderi Peak, finds the Eye of the Dead God, and enters the void. Fighting through the cult and their ancient envisioned forebears, she enters the ritual hold, where the outsider's physical form is encased in void stone. She's also surprised to find Daud there. His restless spirit will spend forever stewing in regrets. If Billie has found Malchiod's notes, she can try to convince Daud to speak the outsider's name, reversing the ritual that made him, making him human again. Or she can use the knife to kill him. This choice will determine whether Daud's spirit finds peace or spends eternity on a butcher's block. Either way, it is here that Daud's story truly ends. It must be said without equivocation, Daud is a villain. He's not misunderstood, or a lovable rogue, or a heart of gold with a rough exterior, or any other cliché. He's a cold-blooded murderer who's killed more than his share of innocent people for coin. Like most of the characters in Dishonored, he's suffered a lifetime of trauma that's made him hard and unforgiving. But unlike in the cases of Corvo, Emily, or even Billie, he fully embraced the darkness within himself to, as he put it, enforce his will on the world. He resents the universe for his existence, and, like Johnny Ringo in Tombstone, craves revenge for being born. This comes through in his everyday demeanor. He is sullen, morose, cold, and calculating. For all this, he still believes that he is somehow important, that his mark means that he's destined to make some great change in the world. This feeds an ego that, combined with his nihilistic outlook, creates a truly dangerous individual. Like many people who've been victimized from childhood, feeling powerful, feeling some measure of control over what happens to him and others, can be more than addictive, it can be all-consuming. According to the official game strategy guide, Daud's motto is Ego homini lupus, or I am a wolf to man. We'll ignore for now the lore implications of Latin existing in the Dishonored world. Daud is furthermore severely anhedonic. There's a million coin word for you. He takes pleasure in nothing outside the exercise of personal power. Aside from his last sip of Billie's whiskey, he doesn't generally drink alcohol and is confirmed as asexual. It's only after seeing the consequences of murdering Jessamine that the marble exterior cracks, and it cracks hard. It was as if he'd killed the heart of Dunwall itself, and the collapse that followed weighed on him like no job before ever had. So when he saw that Delilah plotted to essentially eliminate Emily as well, he chose to act, for the first time, to undo what he'd done. Make no mistake, this is not a redemption arc. There can be no redemption for all the blood he spilled. Daud is acting according to his personal dictates as he always has, and it's only now he sees the error of how he's lived his life. He makes his choices and takes what comes. A big part of this is Billie's betrayal, which cuts deeply even though he knows it was inevitable. When he's at Corvo's mercy, he asks, "What have I accomplished?" realizing that nothing he's ever done has made his life better. When Daud disappears after Dishonored 1, it seems his story is over, only to pop up again in Death of the Outsider. It seems he's had yet another change of heart, and instead of accepting responsibility for his actions, now blames the Outsider for giving him such power, knowing what he'd do with it. This is a pretty dramatic shift, and many players have questioned the logic of it. But at the end of the day, it's a game, and like it or not, the story serves it, rather than defines it. One interpretation is that Daud has taken the idea of undoing what he's done so far, that he believes removing the Outsider is the only way to prevent anyone like him and Billie from ever emerging again. At the end of Death of the Outsider, Billie has a choice to make: kill the Outsider or turn him human again. From a gameplay perspective, this is the player's choice. Simply keep picking the non-lethal dialogue option, and that's what will happen, eventually. But in the story, this is also Daud's final choice. Significantly, this is the one place where the player must not once, but repeatedly pick the option of freeing the Outsider, in effect having to convince Daud of this choice. This is his final chance. Again, not for redemption, he's beyond that. It's his last chance to let go of the hate that's fueled most of his life. Billie reminds Daud of how he once showed her mercy after she betrayed him, and that the Outsider deserves no less of a chance. Like Daud, the Outsider essentially had his humanity ripped from him at a young age, and has spent long years paying for a choice he didn't make. Now Daud has one final chance to show that the Outsider was right after all, that he was important. Choosing to release the Outsider from his immortal prison is just enough, not to redeem him, but to bring his spirit just enough peace that he can dissolve away into nothingness. And in the grim world of Dishonored, the gift of non-existence is seen as the best possible outcome. It's the general consensus among the Dishonored fandom that Daud represents the most fascinating character of all, and the Daud DLCs are often considered the apex of the series in terms of narrative quality. He's a bad guy in a bad world who's forced to face the realities of the horrors he's inflicted on it. Of all his sins, pride at thinking he was important might be the worst, since it led to all the others. His penance isn't to have the same horrors inflicted on him, but to struggle to put just a little bit of it right knowing it won't benefit him at all. All the coin he's earned ends up profiting him nothing. And the best ending he can hope for is to die with nothing. At the very last, he does end up bringing about a pivotal change in the world, for good or ill, but he had to swim through an ocean of blood to do it. Tortured protagonists like Daud are often compelling characters to play, letting us explore themes of regret and consequence from behind the safety of a screen. Controlling their actions and living in their story for a while can sometimes give us a little bit of perspective on our own real-life choices. Let's just be thankful we don't actually live in a world where one day we might turn around and come face to face with the Knife of Dunwall.